Okay, welcome everyone. And today I want to present you Terri Kozlowski. She is an author, life coach, and host of the Soul Solutions podcast. So I'm excited to have this conversation today with Terri, and I hope you all enjoy it as well. So thanks so much for being here, Terri.
Thank you for having me, Sharla. I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, this is going to be great. So just to get started, so what has inspired you to do the work that you're doing?
My work came out of me being able to overcome my own fears and limiting beliefs. I am a survivor of childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm.
The short story is my mother allowed three men to rape me when I was 11 years old so she could have drugs. She
Oh.
was an alcoholic and a drug addict. And so I spent most of my life dealing with the fact that if your mother can't protect you, is unwilling to protect you, obviously she can't love you. So then I am unworthy of love. And so I struggled with that for a very, very long time.
Mm.
So my journey to do the work ended up coming out through, I started writing a book. And prior to 2018, if you would have asked me about writing my story, I would have said no. It was not something I ever thought about doing, not something I dreamed of doing. And then in 2018, the year I turned 50, I was pregnant with a book and it literally flowed out of me in 9 months. I'm unlike the other people, other authors who sit down and write out an outline. Didn't do any of that. The title came to me and then I sat down and started typing. And I ended up
Oh.
taking longer to go through the editing process, probably because I did not do it the correct way and getting that fleshed out so that the book Raven Transcending Fear came to life. And through me writing the book, I realized that there were very unique steps that I went through to overcome my own fears and limiting beliefs. And I started realizing that over the years, people had been asking me different aspects of it, and I had been helping other people along the way. And this was me being able now to focus all of that creative energy that I now had, as well as my desire to really help women. When the Me Too era came out, and all of these people were really coming out and saying that it happened to them and it happened to them, it was really sad to witness because when it had occurred to me, when I was going through it in the early 80s, I really, really believed I was the only one. It was not something talked about. And and I went to therapy from the age of 11 till I was 18. And it wasn't ever brought up in therapy, even though I had told my dad a year after everything happened what occurred. The therapist still didn't know how to talk to me about it. And I certainly at 11, 12, 13, 14 wasn't going to bring it up because I didn't understand. I didn't have the words to express what I thought occurred. I had no idea. So through all of that, the book came to be, and
Mm.
through my pain and then through my recovery and through my healing process, the book came to be. And I've now am able to use my own experience as a path for others that they can take as well. Because I did most of the work by myself on my own. I'm here to support other women to go through the process as well.
Wow. It's an amazing story. So did you start your work with women before the book, or did it all come after or at the same time as the book?
I think it started before the book, where I was always talking to other women, and I help facilitate women finally say, well, that happened to me too. And I was in various women's groups, and in one of them I spoke to 600 women talking about the fact that, if you look around you, there's 600 of us here, and back then it was one in five. Now
Mm.
we're down to, it's now 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted by the time they're 18 years old. So it's, the numbers are astronomical and we're not getting better. And the only way I think that's going to improve is for us to all stand up and say, hey, this is not supposed to be happening. This is wrong. And there's more of us than you think.
Yeah, exactly. So what would be your advice to anyone who's listening who have had experiences like that in the past, and maybe they're not able to speak about it yet, or think I'm alone, or what can I do? What would be your advice for them?
It, Two things. Number one, we're never really alone. we think we're alone. And our ego, who's meant to protect us. And when we have a trauma, our ego's hackles go up and is always in a flight or fight scenario. Everything for the first 10 years after my trauma, I was in a state of fear at all times. And everything was about, am I safe? Am I not safe? Should, I was looking for the danger everywhere I went. So in that state, there are two things you can do. One, journal,
Mm.
because you have to get out those emotions. You have to get out the negativity. Even if all you write is, all that negativity out onto the page, keep writing, because that will help release that negative energy, those emotions that have to arrive us. I spent the first 5 years stuffing and didn't react to anything. And then I started reacting, and then it went to the extreme, the other extreme. So I literally, in the first 10 years, went from being in a state of depression, which is us living in the past. And every day I was going through and waking up and remembering the trauma, living through the trauma over and over and over again. And then there were specific triggers that instantly would go ahead and bring me to that state where
Mm.
I'm back in that trauma. And then I went to the other extreme, which was becoming very anxious. And I was on anxiety meds and all of that, because when you live in the future and you're worried about the future, you are then still not dealing. I wasn't dealing with the past, even though I was living in it. And I wasn't dealing with the future, because that's where I needed to be in the present. And my ego did that to protect me, but also it keeps us stuck if we don't realize that that's what's happening, is that we stay stuck in our trauma. And about 10 years after the event, I was in college and I had somebody tell me that I liked being the victim. And I got very irate,
Wow, I
got
can
very
imagine.
upset. But something about how he said it to me made me pause and think about it. And I dwelled on it for a good period of time. And I finally realized I did get something out of it. When you are a victim, when you identify with your victimhood, people treat you differently.
Hmm.
They're cautious with you. They're gentle with you. They say they don't want to trigger you. So they're very, very caring. And the other thing they do is, if they don't know how to respond, they leave you alone. And that's really what I wanted. I wanted to be left alone. But I realized at the age of 18 that obviously there has to be a better way for me to communicate this to others. And I made a major mindset shift, one of being the victim to one of being a survivor. And
Mm.
when I made that mindset shift, two things occurred. Number one, I was now responsible for the choices I made. Up until that point, everything I could go back and say, well, it's because I was traumatized. That's because my mother didn't love me. That's because of my mother was an alcoholic. I could blame, and I didn't take responsibility for, even though it had been 10 years and my mother had very little to do with my life, I was still using that as an excuse to why I was staying stuck. So I had to take responsibility. And that's what came out of becoming a survivor. When you start being a survivor, you take responsibility for the actions you take now and moving forward. Even if I make a really bad decision, and I made lots of those, I was still accountable for that decision making process. And it helps you learn to make better decisions. But that was the first thing. The second major shift that occurred was when you become responsible, you empower yourself to change your life. You
Mm.
empower yourself now to say, you know what? My mother doesn't have control of my present, nor does she have control on my future. I'm going to choose how I move forward, and she doesn't get a say in it anymore. And that's the two things that come out of being able to switch from being the victim, identifying as the victim, and becoming a survivor.
Mm. I love that. Definitely taking responsibility for, I mean, where you're at or where you're heading, really, right? Just
Hmm.
to,
Right. Because a lot of us, when we deal with trauma and we're in the trauma, we don't realize that that's kind of what we're doing, that we're blaming everything.
yeah.
And the moment you take responsibility for, okay, starting this day, I actually didn't look backwards. Starting this day and moving forward, I'm responsible for the choices I make,
Mm-hmm.
because that way I had a definitive line of, okay, the decisions I made after this, I absolutely am responsible for. So it was clear for me. I'm a
Yeah,
very black and white person as far
exactly.
as ideas are concerned.
That's not a bad thing. So, shifting gears a little bit into a couple of the topics I wanted us to talk about today. I think you already kind of got into some of it a bit, but um, so why does it matter to have a why is it important to have a growth mindset?
The reason it's important to have a growth mindset is because it's about being able to look at the situations you are in or the situations that happen to you and glean a lesson from them. All of our experiences, whether we think they're positive or negative, are meant for us to grow. And if we don't use them for that growth process, we stay stuck.
Mm,
And none of us want to stay, you know, a teenager. None of us want to stay in our 20s. All of us do grow and mature. And we don't want to, although we all say we want our little 4-year-old to stay 4-year-old forever
yeah.
because they're so darn cute. But, that's not how sure work. We have to be able to grow as individuals so that if we have children, we can take care of them and teach them. Or if it's just ourselves, that we learn how to take care of ourselves and do it better each day. So the growth mindset really comes down to back to taking responsibility, but being able to look at the lessons that occur in our lives and to reframe those negative things into something that we can learn from so that we don't stay stuck in whatever that trauma was, whatever that negativity was. I can look back at what happened to me and say, I became very strong and I'm able to help women and empower women to become their authentic selves. Because I think I was very aware as a child, because I believe that we all come here knowing who we are. We have a plan for our lives. We're very strong and authentic. And when you look at small children, they know what they want
Yeah.
and they can be vocal about it unless we shush them. So if you have a child that's wanting to be very artistic and very flamboyant and you try to contain that, are you squishing their authenticity? So we have to,
Mhm.
as parents, look at how we're dealing with our children. So I had great freedom as a small child until the traumatic event occurred. I knew who I was. I knew what my plan was. And the other aspect of children is that we come in loving everybody. We don't
Mhm.
know hate and we don't know fear. And
Mhm.
it's only until we move into this world and deal, sadly to say, with our families that we learn that what fear is and we learn what hate is. We learn about those things, that judgment and all of that. And so even afterwards, after my trauma, I knew enough that okay, something happened, it was big. I really don't know what it was. I was so aware that when I got home to my dad and got off the plane, I told him, I need therapy. Now I'm 11. I shouldn't know what therapy is
No.
back in the early 80s, but I knew enough that this was something I needed help with. So that was something that looking back, I can say I was a strong kid because I learned to ask for help early. I mean, right away, I asked for help. And for a lot of people, it takes them a really long time to get to that place that they can just voice the fact that they need help.
Yeah, exactly. So when we're talking about, why it's important to grow is, learning from our lessons and things, but sometimes do you think it's easy to do, or do you think that can be challenging to do that, right?
It can be challenging. The reason for many, yes, it is challenging is based on our perspective. So if we really, really wanted something and we attach to outcomes instead of saying, okay, I want the best outcome and the universe knows what that is. Because the best outcome is not necessarily the outcome I think that should happen.
Mhm.
Because maybe the outcome I think should happen may be good for me, but not good for the rest of my family. Now I want the best outcome for all of us, not just me. So, and we don't know that. The universe does. The universe
Yeah.
knows. So it's being able to say, okay, I'm trusting the universe. And although I think this is a negative thing, it doesn't seem, nobody else around me seems to be really upset. So obviously I'm attached to a certain outcome that I need to release. So the best way to do that is to accept what is. When we accept what is, we release the struggle we have to the attachment of whatever we thought was the way to work things out. So it's, for me, I let things go fairly easily. And my son, who will be 30 this year, made a comment to me recently that, I am so laid back. He doesn't know where his mother went because I wasn't this way, and it's a growth process. And as you realize, okay, I'm a planner. So when you plan things and things don't quite go the way they're supposed to, you kind of, you have an angst about it. And part of that is when we attach to things, it attaches to our worth. Oh, I messed up. That didn't come out as perfectly as I wanted to. And it's not necessarily the situation isn't a good one. It's that we think it's a reflection of us. And if we have low self-confidence, or our egoic mind is, that inner critic is telling us, you messed up, you took a misstep. In the grand scheme of things, a misstep to the left or the right while you're trying to walk a straight line isn't a big deal. You can course correct.
Yeah.
Just inhale and exhale and course correct.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like, I've heard this a lot as well. Nothing, I can't remember who said it. Nothing is good or bad. It just is. And it's good or bad based on, what importance we put on it and perspective that we put on it. So, yeah, totally believing, trusting that everything is happening for the best, the best of all for everyone. No, I really like all of that, what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense. And I hope that's connecting with the people who are listening as well.
My husband and I have a disagreement about change because I think change is neutral.
Okay.
And he absolutely does not think change is neutral. And he said, he, at one point he had been furloughed from his job, and he said, how is that good? And I said, I didn't say it was good. I said the change itself was neutral. It has effects on us and how we determine the outcome. What changes did we make when this happened? Were they good changes? Well, we moved and we're in a better place than we were then.
Mm,
So was the change neutral? Yes. Did we make the best out of it? Yes. Did he think it was a bad thing? Yes. So, at the time, it wasn't in his mind a good thing. It was just really bad. How we look at it, and looking back, he can say, well, it got us to where. And I said, so the universe knew better.
yeah.
Yes, it did. It was uncomfortable at the time, but the universe did work everything out. So, I think change is neutral, and some people don't agree, but at the same time, it's really about how we interpret the change, what our perspective is. And you can look at it through a gray lens and see clouds and gloom, or you can look through a pink lens and see it bright and sunny.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And you're talking about kind of letting go. I talk about that as often as well with my listeners, just releasing control. It just releases a lot of stress and just makes life easier and smoother. And again, like, even from experience, it's can be easier said than done. But I think it's a practice as well.
It is a practice. And the major component to letting go of control is the fact that there's only one thing on the planet that you can control, and that is you.
Right.
You can control you. You can't control your kids. You can't control your significant other. You can't control anybody but you. So if you want to make the situation, whatever it is, better, control yourself. Quit reacting to those situations that occur that cause you angst. And instead, inhale, exhale, pause, and then respond. Because when you do the breathing exercise, and if you do it 3 times, if you inhale and exhale 3 times to a count of 5, you end up, your autonomic nervous system automatically kicks in and you calm down.
You do.
You will lower your blood pressure, you calm down. And just that, what it takes you to do that, and you being calm now, your response was going to be so different than what you had just those 3 seconds ago over those deep breaths. And that alone will really change how you feel about the situation, how others feel about you, and you won't react, you will respond. And I have a clear distinction between reacting and responding. Reacting is that emotional angst that is an automatic egoic response. Whereas if you pause, if you take that pause, you allow your soul to whisper to you the next best step.
I love
But
that.
you have to be quiet for you to hear your soul's whispers.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, totally. The deep breathing works amazingly fast
Mhm.
for calming
It
down. You can
does.
feel it in your body. It's
Mhm.
incredible. Yeah, love that. Um, there's something else I wanted to ask, and now I forget. Um, anyway, we'll move on. So, how to overcome fear and limiting beliefs? Do you have a step-by-step process, or just certain practices you recommend?
I went through a process, and we all go through certain processes because we have to be able to move through things. Our minds are very methodical. And so you have the egoic mind, and then you have your soulful self, and your authentic self can move through things faster, but your brain can't keep up with it. So although I know that there are people that have been healed instantaneously and have been able to move through things in their healing process very quickly, and then there are others of us like me that took decades. So it's a process. And I went through, I had to clear, 10 years here, 10 years there. And then in the last 12 years or so, it went really, really fast, the last portion of it, because I think part of it is also if we're aware of where we are and what the next step is. And for me, um, Maslow hierarchy of needs, the first one is sustenance. Do you have food? Do you have a house to live in? And all of that. And I have always had that. The second one is safety. And that's where I didn't. So my trauma caused me to not have safety. And it took me, I want to say almost 12 years to find, no, almost 20 years to find safety.
Mm,
So when you don't feel safe, you can never move on to the next hierarchy of needs. You stay stuck there. And that's just, if you don't feel safe, you don't feel safe, and you can't grow because you're always looking for that next bad thing to happen.
mm,
So when I got to the place where I felt safe, and that was when I was 28 years old and I met my current husband, it was really interesting because I'm with him and I'm kind of like, I'm not quite sure what I feel here. I'm very confused by this. And it finally occurred to me I wasn't scared.
oh,
And because I had spent from the age of 11 to the age of 28 scared, I didn't know what not being scared was. And when are no longer fearful about everything, you
mhm,
can start to grow. You can start moving through those phases of learning how to set personal boundaries, of learning how to learn self confidence and understand that you are worthy just because you are, period.
mhm.
And for me, that one, the worthiness one, took me a while to learn, because you have to learn worthiness before you can set personal boundaries. Because if you don't feel that you're worth those boundaries, you're not going to set them. So there's a process to move through.
Definitely. And of course, everyone moves through it, like you said, at different rates,
Hmm.
and one of the big lessons too is never compare yourself to others, right? Because
Absolutely.
again, that's the egoic mind coming in.
That's exactly it. Because the ego doesn't want you to change. The ego wants to maintain where it is. It doesn't like change. That's why, my husband makes the comment that, human beings don't like change. I said, no, the egoic mind doesn't like change. Humans are all about change. We're always changing, but the egoic mind doesn't like it. It likes the routine. It likes habitual behaviors because it knows what those are. In
Yeah.
my book, I talk about the thorny blanket. And part of the healing process is realizing that you have this thorny blanket around you, because when you have had some sort of traumatic event, all you want to do is curl up and stay put. And that's the ego encourages that.
Mhm.
So when you start healing, when you start realizing, okay, I think I have some oozing wounds, and you try to take off that blanket, what you don't realize is that there were thorns in that blanket you put on. Those defense mechanisms that you put into place when you were going through your trauma were meant to protect you, and they did an excellent job. But now they're a hindrance. And as you're taking off the thorny blanket and that you have that open wound, and somebody comes up and rubbing your back and saying, trying to take care of you, them rubbing your back hurts like crazy because they're rubbing on that open wound. And now you have a new kind of pain, a pain that is unfamiliar. So you quickly put that thorny blanket back on
Mm.
because that pain with that thorn sticking in you is familiar.
Yeah.
That's what the ego knows. So the ego says, okay, I don't know what that other thing was. But any type of healing, you cut yourself, it's going to hurt as it heals. That's part of the healing process. There's sensation there as the nerve is, reconnecting things properly and skin is growing over the cut. There's sensation that's unfamiliar. So when the ego is up against that, it doesn't want to deal with it.
Mm.
So it's learning and understanding that as there is a healing process, and some of it's going to be uncomfortable. But when you are uncomfortable, that's how you know you're growing.
Yes.
That's how you know you're growing, because in our comfort zone, we're maintaining. We're
Yeah.
doing exactly what the ego wants us to do, keep everything the same. But when you move into that discomfort level, that's when you're starting to expand your soul and grow.
Mhm. That's the exciting, fun part.
Yep.
So, talking about, letting go and, it's saying, the universe is looking after the greater good of all and everything. Would you say that there's a lot of self-talk involved in there and self-reminding in order to get yourself through that?
There is a lot of self-talk, and self-talk is probably the hardest thing that I had to overcome, was the negative self-talk that I had. So I had a lot of tapes, I called them tapes, where I would play my mother's voice in my head, telling me that I was unworthy, telling me that it was all my fault, that she was an alcoholic, telling me that I was the reason my dad left her. And when I hit about 35, I realized she's not pushing the play button. That's me
Mm.
pushing the play button. I need to stop this. And if I could have ripped the tape out of my head and torn it to shreds, I would have, but that's not how we work. And it's learning that when that tape gets turned on, for whatever reason, whatever triggered that tape, that we quickly recognize that is untrue. So one of the tapes that played, which was something the ego had put in place to protect me, was the three men that raped me were Hispanic men. So in high school, if I saw a Hispanic man, I was terrified. So when I became an adult, I started working with Hispanic men, and they're lovely, lovely people. And I've worked for decades with them. And now, even though I see walking down the street, Hispanic man, sometimes my ego will say, hey, watch out. And now I
Mm.
can say, thank you, ego, for forewarning me. I've had more positive experiences than negative experience, because I've only had one negative experience with Hispanic men. So I'm going to dismiss this. And if we learn how to talk to ourselves so that those egoic, fearful statements are dealt with in a way that we acknowledge that the ego is doing its job, and then we can dismiss it, because just because you see a bell ringing doesn't necessarily mean you have to stop everything and change route or anything. It's just
Mhm.
about recognizing that. So the inner critic and that negative self-talk has to be switched up and changed into becoming more loving. And the best way to do that is, and I learned this because I had a child, was the way I talk to my child and the way I talk to myself were very, very different. And I would never have talked to anybody the way I talk to myself. And if you will not say those words to others that you say to yourself, that's a clue that you shouldn't be saying it to yourself either.
Mm.
And it
Yes.
to change. You need to change that up and talk to ourselves the way we would a close friend, a loved one, a child.
Mhm. And the first step, is just being aware of what we are actually saying to ourselves. So I think a lot of us, we're not even aware, on a day-to-day basis.
Or there are patterns of behavior that have been generationally put in place. So
Mhm.
when we look at within my current immediate family with my husband and our 3 kids, there is a lot of smart aleck comments made, and the kids all poke at each other, and they all poke at dad, and they all poke at me, and they're all adults now, and they still do it. And my husband pokes back, and my son said to me, why aren't you participating anymore? I said, because I think it's a form of bullying, and I'm not going to do it, because technically that's what it is. When you make a smart aleck remark to somebody that is because they made a misstep, they did something wrong, and now you're poking at that, that's
Mm,
being passive aggressive. That's not funny, even though it's acceptable behavior in our society. That, if a lot of the comedians, that's what they're doing. They're just
yeah.
poking at people. And it's, in my opinion, wrong. And ultimately, it harms not only the person that you're saying it to, but it harms yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because now, guess what you're going to do to yourself? If you're going to do that to somebody else, you're going to do that to yourself too.
Yeah. And you may think it's all fun and jokes or whatever, but it doesn't build anyone up. It just
Correct.
slowly erodes,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Yeah. Wow. I'm interested. Where did you get the title, or what's the story behind the title of your book, Raven Transcending Fear?
So I am Native American,
Hmm.
and I'm Athabascan Tinglet tribe Raven clan. So
Okay.
my familiar family is the Raven. And growing up, my mother did not tell me a whole lot about our specific tribe. So in high school, I started learning about my roots. And in doing so, I learned that the Raven has a lot of symbology. And overall, it's associated with death, and it has a lot of negative connotations because it's all black.
Mm.
And if you actually look at the symbology throughout history, the raven shows up at death to help the spirit transcend to the next plane.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's what that is it's a transcending place. The other thing for my specific tribe was the raven brought the light to humanity. So for me, in the process of the light finally coming into my life and me being able to move forward and transcend my fears. So it's a lot. There's a lot of ravens in my house, a lot of symbology there for me that is personally for me, as well as then it translated into the book. There are 6 stanzas. I wrote a poem, and there's 6 stanzas, and the first stanza of each is at the beginning of each chapter, so that the
Okay.
whole Raven Transcending Fear poem is there.
Oh, beautiful. Nice. So, just to wrap up, I always like to ask this question. I know it can be a big question, so if you need a few seconds to think about it, take your time. I
Okay.
like to ask, so if you had one final message to leave the world, what would be the message that you would want to share?
You are worthy exactly as you are, because you are. You are a unique individual with a unique set of talents, a unique set of perspectives, and the world needs you now. If you weren't here now, it would matter
Mm,
to somebody in this world, because we all influence people, whether we realize it or not. We are not islands. We all are connected. We all are meant to connect with others, and you are worthy exactly the way you are.
I love that. The way you said it, oh my gosh, it felt so good. Thank you for that.
Wonderful. You're welcome.
Any last things that you want to add? Where we can find you, or any final messages or things that you wanted to say?
So people can find me at terrikozlowski.com, which is my website. I have the Soul Solutions podcast at soulsolutionspodcast.com. And the book is raventranscendingfear.com, or you can get it on Amazon. So anybody can reach me. I'm across the different social medias. So reach out to me. I'd be happy to converse with anybody and share.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Terri.
Thank you for having me, Sharla. We had a great conversation.
You did. Thank you.